everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Melissa Romero, Forensic Science Consultant and CNN Media Group. The presentation today is sponsored by Dotmatics. Dotmatics is a leader in R&D scientific software connecting science, data, and decision-making. Its enterprise R&D platform and scientists' favorite applications drive efficiency and accelerate innovation. More than 2 million scientists and 10,000 customers trust Dotmatics to help them create a healthier, cleaner, safer world. Dotmatics is a global team of more than 800 people dedicated to supporting its customers in over 180 countries. The company's principal office is in Boston, Massachusetts, with 14 offices and R&D teams located around the world. During the presentation today, we will be hearing from Dr. Hayden Bowen. Hayden is the Director of Product Marketing for Dotmatics, focused on helping the life science and drug discovery industries learn how Dotmatics R&D software solutions can harmonize their science and data and accelerate innovation to make the world a healthier, cleaner, and better place to live. Hayden has 20 years of sales and marketing leadership experience in the life science industry, working with companies such as Thermo Fisher Scientific, Johnson Matthey, and more recently with MilliporeSigma's Connected Lab program. Hayden has a PhD in organic chemistry with the University of Nottingham in the UK and lives currently on the Jurassic Coast in Devon, UK with his family. And let's get started. I will now turn it over to Hayden.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Melissa. Thanks for that introduction. So welcome everybody and greetings from the Jurassic Coast. So today we're going to think about the 3 key considerations when implementing AI in drug discovery. So our agenda is going to be a very brief introduction to Dotmatics and then talk a little bit about some of the industry challenges that we're facing in and amongst the implementation of AI, and think about perhaps sort of 3 key considerations that we may want to think about when trying to sort of successfully bring that forward. And then we'll do our conclusions and questions, as is traditional with such events as these. So again, I think Melissa's probably covered quite a lot of this anyway, so we can whistle through. Yeah, headquartered in Boston. We've got offices dotted around the world, serving over 2 million scientists and over 10,000 customers. And you can see from this graphic the people that we've been working with over the last 15 years, and they've been very important from our perspective, because this has very much been a co-creation as we've continued to develop software for sort of certain point solutions and our platform in order to create a complete workflow around small molecule drug discovery. And the reason that we continue to sort of keep thinking about this challenge is really highlighted on this screen. So, I think this is a harmonized slide from multiple different papers that you can find out in the industry around this sort of drug discovery pipeline. Typically one of the challenges are it's very expensive. So there's always a continuous thought, how could we reduce this cost? It takes a pretty long time. It takes about somewhere between 4 to 5 years through this discovery phase. And it's sort of, then you move into that clinical trial phase, and that again can be 7 to 12 before we're looking to commercialize a therapy. And with that, to get from the sort of, from the discovery phase, you're looking at typically developing, 10,000 molecules in order to sort of get to this magic 250 preclinical candidates, and then that sort of drops again. So, we're looking from that 10,000 to 250. We've got a 98% attrition rate. It's 96% at the next stage as we move through preclinical, and then we're on a 90% attrition rate as we go through clinical trials. So this is, a pretty, pretty disheartening process when you get to look at it at times. So, it's like, right, okay, could there be ways for us to find better candidates more quickly and more cost effectively? How could we go about doing that? Because, and where we sort of really focus our attention to is very much at this discovery to try and optimize the upstream part in order to maybe, reduce the downstream cost of failure. And when we look at that sort of discovery piece, there's again, multitude of challenges that we try to sort of bunch into sort of 4 buckets here. One, we have a productivity and collaboration challenge, as especially we've been, the discovery process has become more sort of outsourced with the use of CROs and the partnerships between CROs. That in itself creates quite a more, adds complexity to the workflow. So, a lot of hidden complexity in and amongst that, which can impact the overall operational efficiency of bringing drugs to market. With multiple sort of data points, point solutions, things like that, there's a continuous sort of data integrity issue, as we've got a lot of manual transfer of data. That in turn can also sort of have an impact in terms of the way we manage that and what that means from regulatory compliance. And so, with all of these challenges, that could, absolutely have an impact on the ability to, have these insights and innovations. Can we sort of, make these breakthroughs? Are we getting all the data to make the most informed decisions possible? And so, that becomes, interesting how we sort of think about challenging that. And ways that we've looked to optimize the drug discovery process has been sort of, cheminformatics. And so the sort of term AI and machine learning actually is not very new in this forum. Realistically, we've seen AI and machine learning actually have a pretty significant impact over the last sort of 20 years. And certainly if we look at this graphic on the right-hand side, the improvement of screening technologies, coupled with the improvement of modeling capabilities, has actually led to greater understanding of targets and potential therapies. And therefore, what's happened is that this chemical or biologically active chemical space that was perhaps deemed undruggable to small molecule before actually has become open and available. It's uncharted, so there's a lot for us to be going at. So actually, AI and ML has been a sort of a staple of the small molecule drug discovery industry. Now, with the sort of the boom of the hype around this sort of the AI or data as an asset, how do you sort of utilize sort of AI to sort of really process it? There's been wide adoption of AI, and what we see at the moment is this unprecedented amount of AI startup funding. And then with it comes sort of some pretty big claims, big headlines. It's kind of the panacea to revolutionize the industry. But what we're starting to, see, and we'll touch on where some of these other sort of, big claims are sort of coming in before, is that right now there's a sort of a little bit of a sense that the expectations yet to be met at the moment. We've also seen some impacts where, partnerships have decoupled, and there's some things hitting the headlines over the last sort of couple of months. There's been some devaluations and in some cases some decreasing investment. And this graphic on the right-hand side sort of perhaps, is an interesting sort of indicator here. There are 250 active drugs, in the phase of this discovery process, but not really much has cleared phase 2 at this point in time. And there's been a couple of, even since this graphic, where one of those phase 2 has actually dropped out of the trial. So, so there's some interesting sort of facts that come with this. And so these sort of promises around, shorten timelines, eliminate wet lab work, reduce cost by 70%. These are some headline grabbers for sure. But we need to think about how we want to apply AI, and should we apply AI, and what can we apply AI to at different parts of the value chain of drug discovery. So, and the graphic here, which is courtesy of the Deloitte Insights from 2 years ago, sort of really captures some of those sort of key areas about where could be places to sort of optimize the, or really sort of put AI to its best purpose. So, what's triggering some of the hype? I mean, I sat in a strategic, drug discovery conference, or drug discovery strategy conference a couple of years ago. And the AlphaGo example was banded around like nobody's business. Saying, oh yeah, look at this! It's managed to, beat the best Go player in the world, and it was able to do this. It did moves that nobody expected. And it's like, well, let's take these sort of things and be very careful how we use them. Let's put a little bit of precaution, because the AlphaGo only just won by the smallest of margins. It favoured very sort of moves that guaranteed victory. Yes, it did learn from its previous mistakes, and then from that, we have to have these thoughts. In this Go, game. The rules and the outcome are defined very clearly. And whereas, we work in discovery, where it's not, we're still learning. That's why it's called discovery. So we need to sort of take some of these, things that sort of moderate or amplify the hype with a pinch of salt. And actually that's, brought around a lot of artificial expectations. So I think it's really sort of important for us to start thinking, right, let's be quite, resolute about what we're doing. And also maybe think of a cautionary tale from perhaps 20 years ago, at the time that I was in the labs with working as a CombiChem chemist, building sort of CombiChem libraries where we looked at automation and CombiChem as the big thing, and everything was being thrown at this, that we were going to suddenly, the theory was that if we could bring, optimize the speed of bringing more and more candidates to trial, to preclinical trials. So actually we could make 1 million compounds for every library rather than 10,000. And we could do that by 100 A inputs times by 100 B times by 100 C. And we could make use of all of the commercially available building blocks that were available. So in order to make that work, what happened was that we had to simplify the chemistry down to sp2 couplings. And what that meant is that we built 1 million very flat molecules. But the binding site and the target site was 3-dimensional. So there were problems there because the molecule didn't bind to the target site, so we're getting false results there. What was being delivered was a mixed, we had impurity, so it needed to be about 85% pure in order to send that through. We had racemic mixtures as well. And because we got very simple chemistry, it was very easily metabolized. So what we see on the right-hand side is is a lovely paper that was brought forward by the Wall Street Journal that really brought a conclusion to this sort of patent cliff that sort of then started happening, is that this huge investment in automation, actually what was happening in terms of the number of new drugs, that was declining. And that was because of all these reasons here. So again, just because we have a hammer doesn't mean that everything is a nail. So this is our first thing. Let's set some reasonable expectations if we're thinking about implementing AI in drug discovery. This lovely paper by Gartner, published recently, says actually we're really in the early phases. We're nowhere near there yet, and we've got to sort of really get ourselves in shape in order to leverage and bring AI in a sort of suitable manner. So whether we're looking at enriching our data through data-centric models, model-centric, i.e. how we're going to create efficiencies around certain parts of workflows, and also looking at how do we reduce the technical debt that we've sort of got ourselves in with multiple point solutions and optimizing certain tasks. Now we need to connect that all together. And right now we have data in silos. And so, that's very difficult for AI to sort of bring through. So really, their summary is that, we're at the early stages of this. We've nowhere near sort of got to that point where we're applying it. And again, when you look at the numbers of drugs coming through, that would, validate that situation. So again, strategic approach. Where do you want to apply, where and should you apply AI? So when we think about the research phases here, there's some really sort of key things that sort of come about. Is that right? Interoperable data ecosystems are going to be essential in order that we would, if we were to implement AI-driven discovery. So our data all needs to work and sort of talk to each other. So so the key thing there is where can you and where should you use the AI? What's the right thing? The second consideration is having clean data to train the AI on. If we look at, this is a paper that's also out through Deloitte a couple of years ago, 80% of scientists stating having to having workarounds from getting data from one point to the next and having sort of having meaningful outputs of data. And this is negatively impacting their work. And 2/3 of the scientists in this study reported having compromised decision-making due to informatics challenges. So this is, many times when we sort of read this, the answer is, right, data scientists, let's bring data scientists, and we're seeing more data scientists in our organization. But when you poll the data scientists, this is a study through Forbes, actually we've got some very unhappy data scientists who said that actually they spend about 80% of their time cleansing data and organizing data. Now, that probably, and it's the least satisfactory part of their job to an equal amount. So it means we've got some very unhappy data scientists that, who knows, may feel that this isn't what they want to do with them for their lives anymore. And certainly probably wasn't the reason that they studied data science in the first place, because they wanted to build cool AIs in order to really accelerate the industry. But the foundations are not there for that to happen. So this becomes an interesting thing about, right, okay, if we want to use AI, we probably want to get our data clean. And what we're sort of seeing, and we sort of think about how we've optimized the sort of drug discovery workflow, is that when we look, just taking from this sort of, once we've got a hit, and we're sort of looking at that sort of, screening the first hit and then lead identification, going through lead optimization, actually in this sort of make, test, decide sort of wheel, when it goes from, actually analyzing, selecting hits, generating next ideas, designing the next compound synthesis, purification, register, put them in the inventory, then get them characterized, get the QC done, so send that request through, then send it on for assay screening, so high throughput screening, and then looking at the results again, getting that SAR data back and analyzing that. That whole workflow, there's multiple sort of tasks that need to be done, and actually, through the last sort of 15 to 20 years, there's been software created to optimize each of these tasks. However, that in itself has been brilliant because we've optimized the task. Now we've got ourselves into a little bit of a situation where we've got lots of different, and you see all these different workflow capabilities that are in different colors. And that's done deliberately to say, well, actually, in many cases, we've often got a different vendor who's providing us that software for each of those tasks, which is where our sort of, so we've optimized the tasks, and that's brilliant, but now they don't talk to each other. They don't plumb in very well together. So the burden of making that happen actually sits with our organizations and our IT departments, and our research IT departments. So they've got to sort of develop all these platform services and database requirements. They've got to integrate into other sort of third-party sort of sketch software and other applications as well, bringing web data through. So actually, our organizations have created their own sort of cheminformatics company for half of the business in order to make these, task optimizing softwares work. But there's still a lot of pushing of this data coming through, be it through mixtures of data scientists, research IT, and the medicinal chemists themselves. So that really creates a big burden on the industry today to actually make this work. And so, so what would be a recommendation to optimizing this? Well, here's a paper by Mike Chandler from Gartner in 2018. And his conclusion is that this has been typically, as you move down the bubbles from the left to the right, we start with some standalone point solutions. We know an ELN, then a LIMS, and then we sort of got registration, and we started integrating, and we had sort of point-to-point APIs to connect these systems together. Then we brought more in, and we ended up in their sort of integrated suite, where the suite part is really being managed by the research organization to make all these other applications stitch together and plumb together. But it's not working, and the data is stuck because they're all different data codes, and they don't really talk to each other as a standard out of the box from each other. So the recommendation of how, this creates what's called technical debt. And then if you think about with every one of these solutions, you've got to have different training, you've got a different, so you've got a different services package, you've got a different navigational interface as well. So there's a lot of burden also put on the scientist in terms of, I want to make this work. So how do I do that? So, so there's a lot, then you've got all of the different sort of trainings that you go through. So a lot of time taken out of the research process for that. And then you've got the burden of trying to make it all work together. So the recommendation here is to say, right, okay, what would be great is if you could have a single unified platform that ran all of these applications off of the same data code. And actually there was a single source of truth of data. and therefore all of the different applications were pulling from the same data source. So every interaction you had with the data was registered, which is a fantastic thing from compliance and traceability, which the FDA and the EMA absolutely love. So and it would reduce all this technical debt, because in many cases, a lot of these applications or point solutions are not supported anymore. And the burden of managing that still, again, sits with the research organization. And in some cases, the research organizations have created their own version of these. So again, an even extra burden of being of a drug discovery company acting as a cheminformatics company, and that being a huge issue around their resources and the speed to bringing a molecule to market. So, so these are sort of some of the top challenges that have come out. So, another sort of key thing here that's been sort of from this Deloitte paper was saying, the biggest challenges people find of bringing, AI success really depends upon, having error-free data, so clean data without the need of arduous manual processing. And so that means that then if you've got clean data, then the AI can handle the volume of the data with it. But the variety of the data is a challenge for AI. So you need to ensure the integrity and standardize the data for AI model readiness. And that's the graphic on the right sort of illustrates that as they're trying to implement that. From a tech point of view, the data challenges are the biggest challenges. And so, has this, AI been successfully implemented in industries outside of our own, outside of life sciences? And so, a nice snapshot here of the Google keynote from, I think, probably about sort of 4 to 5 years ago, as long as that, where the introduction of the Google Assistant, and the CEO sort of, did the really fantastic presentation of, hey, Google, can you book me a haircut between 10 and 12, Tuesday morning. And so, that was a big example, but that just didn't happen by chance. Google, like other, big tech companies, invested a lot over a long period of time to starting from search. Then they sort of developed, lots of different point solutions. They had Google Maps, which would enable that. They had sort of, then they had sort of the Gmail, had all the ideas around this. Then they bought YouTube. And why on earth are Google buying YouTube? But they used YouTube to train the voice assistant on voice recognition. So they had this data source they were able to train the AI on. And then from that point of view, they had now a platform where they were running multiple point solutions on several on the same data code, and they could able to integrate this into external hardwares, which is our outer ring here, to make this happen. So it became much more, the virtual assistant became much more applicable. And if you look at, one of their main competitors in that sort of top 4 tech, they've done exactly the same. So the precedent here is a single platform running a single data code, and your data is extremely clean so that you can run several different applications or capabilities around a process of a workflow. And then the final point about thinking about AI is collaboration. So, as sort of a single phrase from Intolerable Cruelty, where they say that few great achievements in life are done in isolation. So, Edmund Hillary had the Sherpa Tenzing Norgay. For any of you that are runners, you saw Louis Kipchoge, break the marathon record in Berlin 2 weeks ago. He was supported by Bottle Klaus, who's now his own sort of meme and right on social media. And same thing here. Sort of this recommendation from the Ernst & Young paper earlier this year, to realistically, for digital investments, you've got to really think quite strategically as a life science organization as to sort of what do you want to be and what's your goal. In many cases, they're advocating you've got to get to the molecule as fast as possible to get to this therapy. So you need to think about what you're investing in and what your organization needs to, from an operational effectiveness point of view. So they advocate strategic partnerships. And again, you see strategic partnerships between, pharma companies, biotech companies, and AI partners. The other aspect is also, right, okay, think about how your cheminformatics works as well. So, can a partner that can give you a unified platform with all the capabilities be a strategic advantage to getting you and your organization focused on drug discovery? And the key thing here, the prioritization of a data foundation is going to be crucial if you want to leverage and get the best out of these partnerships. And so this is sort of where Dotmatics has sort of really been working to sort of think about how do we enable this? What could we do as part of this process? And so we've sort of been building sort of multiple capabilities around that drug discovery workflow. We've been building this up on a platform. Again, that sort of now model looks quite familiar and makes sort of quite a bit of sense. So when we look at this workflow once again, we've built a platform that with all of the capabilities that will enable all of this workflow to happen. And we have lots of different sort of, capabilities and configurations that would enable this to sort of, support this to make it much more usable, whatever sort of size of organization you are and how you want to focus. But the key thing here is that it is a unified platform with several different capabilities using the same data model and data code. Again, from a sort of perspective of working in collaboration, actually multiple different groups, internal and external, can get to the same data or can view capabilities that pull from the same data source. If you are a user, you can do multiple different things with single sign-on. The interface is the same, the navigation is the same, so it's much more intuitive. You don't have to learn multiple different things. The data flows from one capability to the next, so there's not that manual transfer and pushing data through the system. And so with that, we sort of developed two key offerings around this based on sort of basic sort of ELN and including sort of search and registration, inventory, and different sort of discovery analytical templates, as well as sort of more advanced if sort of for throughput screening, as well as working with external partners. And so the goal here for us was to really look at how could we work to improve that productivity and collaboration, as well as sort of optimize the sort of operational efficiency for everybody involved in the drug discovery process, improve that compliance and quality challenge that is still a continuous challenge for us. And we're working at optimizing those. It then brings through and allows sort of greater insights and innovation that's hopefully faster and more cost effective. And so with that, that's really where we sort of see that, thinking about how the observations we find, where we think we play a part, but with all of the elements of drug discovery and the implementation of AI, we said three real things happen. One, let's be very realistic about the expectations and how we use AI. Let's make sure our data is clean. And then let's see how we can have really good strategic collaborations, what they need to look like in order to optimize this process. And so with that, I thank you all for your kind attention. And then I think Melissa's going to help me field some questions.
Yes, I am. And again, I just want to remind the audience that you can ask any questions through the Q&A box that's on your screen. And Hayden, that was an excellent presentation. And I will now give you your first question here. This audience member asked, given huge variety in the data formats from different vendors of analytical techniques, what recommendations would you have for vendors for future AI workflow compatibility?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. And I think what we sort of see is there's a sort of certain element of adversarial interoperability, if you like, at the moment, where, and to exactly that point, everybody's got a different data code. And I think it's really going to be a case of, certainly from sort of an analytical instrumentation point of view, getting behind a standard. Because until everybody does that, that we're going to be quite challenged. And I think if hopefully I don't make too much noise doing this, and I'd say, what does that mean? Well, this is the example I love to use about, everybody used to have a headphone jack that looked like this to get music out of from one thing to another. Then and everybody adhered to that standard of getting the data or getting the sort of sound out of the device. Then somebody made that, which completely changed the game again and created adversarial interoperability because everybody else needed to have something that connected between one thing to the other. And, you know, that sort of, if we continue to sort of keep locking, you know, and creating sort of like fiefdoms or kingdoms and domains, that's not going to move the industry on. So I think it's going to mean a collective, and you're either going to see it drop in one way or another. Either somebody's going to stand up as one of the vendors to do it. Now, whether that's possible, because again, everybody's trying to protect their own data standard, or is it going to take a neutral player? And the people who are going to have to drive this or push for change is actually going to be the user, the scientists and life science organizations to say, right, it needs to do this because we're not going to take the burden of stitching it all together anymore. Something needs to happen. So either the industry's got to get behind a data standard, or somebody's going to have to come as a neutral player and be able to convert all those data standards and turn it into a single standard, or be able to pass it from everybody's version into a single one in order to be able to move the data through. So, you know, obviously we've got our own capabilities that sort of enabled that part of the workflow. I think from a, you know, instrumentation point of view, there's sort of one of three ways it can go. And I think that it's a question that's been bobbling around for a very long time. That's certainly a decade, and it's certainly sort of, you know, the main topic of every Lab of the Future conference that I've attended, and we don't seem to sort of be landing the plane yet. So something's got to change in the industry to make it happen. So I mean, obviously we look at it from a Dotmatics perspective of making instrument agents that could pass these data standards, but it does need everybody in the ecosystem to, you know, join in and say this is what we want to happen. So I think that's how we look at it from Dotmatics perspective. But yeah, so hopefully there's still more work to be done on that, I think.
So to expand on what you were just talking about, this audience member was wondering if some of the big companies like Google or Amazon has thought about expanding their AI into drug discovery. Has that ever been, you know, brought about?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of talk because, I mean, I think the Amazon thing's also looked at sort of from a life science sort of sales perspective as well, or a vendor perspective. And that's not quite happened because of the challenge. So I don't know how this would work. I mean, either they would have to purchase a company to get their sort of foothold. But maybe the challenges around sort of the interoperability is actually not something that they're willing to take on. Perhaps there are sort of more easier ways to sort of resolve problems in other industries that may sort of make that a lot easier. So I've not seen anything directly, but that's not to say it couldn't happen. But so it just depends on what their entry point would be and whether they felt that the ecosystem is likely to sort of, you know, come along or not. I mean, but the evidence that's shown so far is that perhaps that might be a bit more of a challenge they're willing to take on at the moment.
This audience member has a two-part question. I'll read the whole thing and then we'll see if we have to go back to another part. First, he's also thanking that he loves the webinar. Could you please elaborate about the AI and ML's current capabilities for preclinical animal testing studies? And then his second part is, do you know of proofs of concept that the technology works for that step of development?
That's interesting. I mean, the domain that I've sort of, obviously we at Dotmatics playing very much in that sort of between sort of the, you know, the assay, what's the right assay part of it, you know, in the assay sort of development and target development, we sit in that sort of lead to hit optimization, and then sort of not really in that preclinical or clinical trials. But that's an interesting point that's been raised on a few papers just recently as well, is to say, right, well, actually, there are multiple phases that have been, the area around discovery, I think, is perhaps a little bit more ready for AI, a bit more mature in its readiness for AI, especially around small molecule, because there's a lot of work already happened. The modeling around sort of animal systems and, you know, and even patient systems as well. I'm not quite, I think our maturity of these models is a lot, we're in a lot earlier in the process for that. And so therefore, you know, we're in the discovery, maybe we're able to optimize the ability to get to sort of what we think are good targets. But again, there's a bit upstream and a bit downstream that perhaps still needs some work. So, again, I sat at a conference about 6 years ago where I think it was a head of one of a big pharma said, "Oh, right, we were looking at this. This was our target we're aiming at." And then, with a bit more screening or suddenly a step change in terms of the capabilities of the screening, we actually uncovered there were 3 more sites. And actually, we were aiming at target site 1, and actually the active site was site 3. So suddenly all the modeling that they've been doing is completely wrong. So again, it's as the models upstream need to, AI could be used to do that, and we're quite early in the journey for that. But also downstream, look at patient and the predictability around patient and the data around that. There's still a lot of learning and understanding to get to that point for the model to train the AI on. So I think it's a great question, but I would say probably those areas are not as mature as where sort of the more discovery phase is at the moment.
Okay. This audience member was asking what kind of information would one consider as unclean data?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at unclean data, I think it's a lot of the ways of how can the data be found, and then sort of there's this sort of fair data principles: findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And every different data standard has got sort of different meta tags, or in some cases no meta tags whatsoever. So it's really about this sort of differential of metadata, the data about the data. And if you sort of, the analogy I always use is the difference between having a warehouse full of books where you've got a list of what's in the warehouse, but you don't have any data about where it is, and what a library is, where you go, there's an indexing at the front of the library to tell you what aisle is it in, what shelf is it on, and how far down the shelf it is. And that's what metadata allows. So it allows sort of, data to be found and pulled. And whilst we've got lots of different variations, nobody's got the same set of metadata. So it means that if you want to try and run an AI, some tags can't be found there because there aren't any. So therefore, you're only pulling maybe some of the data. So if you want to make a decision, you've got to either manually get involved to sort of pull the rest of it through. And I think that you're going to have to go with not all the data being to hand and make the decision, which again now compromises your decision making around what molecule. And I think if you look at sort of, where we're doing a lot of, balance, when we work in the labs with balances, we in previous company, there's a study that was done where, you weigh out the vial, everything's written down on paper, and then it's manually transcribed into an Excel spreadsheet, and the Excel spreadsheet doesn't have any metadata. So all that information is not findable. Whereas actually by having an instrument agent on the, between that and their ELN, they were able to really then see, right, actually that data capture could happen digitally and be pulled straight in and be given metadata tagging. So even now, sort of what was usually not seen there, a yield with these sort of data points around the sort of the mass and the weights, actually that's part of the information. So now we know how much is in the flask, and that's captured digitally and automated. So, that's sort of where the opportunity lies. And I think that's sort of, it's things like that where we still got this data. It's still on paper. It's a mixture of analog and digital, not meta-tag digital as well. So we've got a lot of very unclean data before we're able to train sort of, AIs on that type of thing. So again, that foundation of getting that clean, that's the base of the pyramid. If we're looking to climb up to get to that AI sort of, top of the pyramid, if you like.
Okay. All right. This audience member is wondering if you can comment on the role of intellectual property on AI in drug discovery.
Yeah. So I think intellectual property, the AI with all sort of contracts that if of an AI partner, there's always going to be a sort of intellectual property sign-off, or there's a different agreement. So I think more recently, one of the studies came to a conclusion, which is in sort of just announced in the public between Bayer and Exscientia, for example, where I think they got in some cases the ability. I think Bayer got everything they wanted from that agreement, and their IP was protected. But I think Exscientia had the right to progress the candidates that they created. So that was part of the deal of the IP. So I think the AI will, I mean, again, it's basically it's just an algorithm. It's something, I mean, we're on very light AI at the moment. So we're just looking at pattern recognition and training models on, pattern recognition models in most cases. So, I think I don't think it's being a big problem, but all of those things get, ironed out. This is already happening with sort of the biggest companies with their AI programs.
Okay. This audience member was wondering, what skills do the people using or even building these tools need?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a data scientist, and I'm not a programmer either. So I'm probably not necessarily the best person to ask. But I mean, it's really going to be about looking at programming, looking at how do you build models or program model recognition, building algorithms. So I wouldn't be able to give you a deep dive into the exact skill set. But and also from a sort of personality point, you need that application as to sort of that being something you want to do. So I think probably anybody offering sort of data science courses will be able to give you a prescription as to what skills and where you go get that. So I think most universities have got these courses available as well.
Okay. This audience member was wondering what strategies could be used to integrate publicly available database information with in-house information for AI ML work.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of been happening for quite a long time, I would say anyway. I mean, I think we had a slide earlier showing sort of, web data, and that's able, I mean, we provide that for a lot of our clients as well. So, and that's been happening for a very long time. So it's not, that's not a new thing. And there's plenty of capabilities that enable that to happen.
All right, this is a longer question, so I want to make sure that I get this all correctly. The critical path for, the audience member starts off with a statement. He says, the critical path for drug pipeline development is decision-making and decision quality. Within the drug discovery paradigm, what types of decisions does AI/ML work successfully, and when does AI/ML not work? And how does the Dotmatics model impact or help this process?
No, great. It's a great question. So I think, where you can, sorry, my wife's just got to pick up my kids, so she's waving. So, so I think, again, this how it works is that I think with the AIs that are available, this allows us to sort of, we're acquiring loads of data at the moment from all the different sort of tools that we've been putting in place, software we've been putting in place. And that data we're getting sort of drowning in that data because we can't move it fast enough. We can't process it fast enough through the system in many cases. Or we get to a point where it's completely untrustworthy because it's been hanging around or a different version control. We're not managing it properly. So sort of, AIs are only as good as the model you train them or the model you build for them or the logic you put into them. And that's sort of, like typical example that I like to use is that if you sort of type in, pictures of pug dogs' faces, inevitably you will get at least sort of like a mixture of pictures of Danish pastries and croissants in there as well, and cinnamon swirls and things like this. It just, that's, because it's the logic of what's been trained on, the recognition, also some of these pictures fit into it. Same reason as to when you're, filling in the form, you get asked to sort of identify, you'll get that sort of finalization. Can you click on the squares that have got a picture of a lamppost on it or a car or a boat? And that's interesting because the error rate between an AI and a human is actually quite similar. It's about sort of 3.6%. But when you put them in combination, it drops about sort of 0.0 something. And that's a very interesting sort of thing to sort of, have in consideration of sort of how you use it. The AI will be able to sort of, do things that the human can't, which is process huge amounts of quantities of data that humans are not built for. These types of very linear tasks, humans get bored, they fatigue, then they start making errors. So the AI can sort of cover a lot of it and say, right, based on that logic, here's the suggestions. And that's where then the scientist comes and say, right, that one I can completely discard because the logic's pulled it through, but it's an anomaly into sort of what we're looking for here. So it's just really a tool. And I think that's the key thing. It's the tool to do what with. There's an argument that what does AI really do in the discovery process? Well, it will pattern recognize, and actually could it be a faster way to get into the magic 250 compounds without having to maybe make 1,000 next time, because actually the decision-making process is optimized as you train the logic around what makes a good candidate. But again, it's only based on a certain amount of what the logic is you put into it. I mean, Lipinski's rule is a good example. Lipinski's rule of 5. Well, realistically, that was a recognition of what candidates that were successful looked like in a certain period of time. Over time, our understanding of target sites got better, and our modeling actually, that's potentially is a barrier to moving forward. So it's a case of, perhaps we need to not just be completely fixed on that and actually move beyond that point as our understanding. It's like now it's a guideline, it's not a rule. So when we think about how do we sort of, get this sort of free-form discovery. So, again, that's important. We're in discovery. There's not the finite part of it is that the therapy needs to make the patient sort of, not suffer or stay around longer, in sort of its crudest essence. So, so from where we are in the discovery process, it's can we use it to process a lot of data very, very quickly to help you make better decisions.
This audience member is wondering, in the field of AI drug discovery, would this need more input or contributions from an informatician, or from the chemists?
I think it could be a mixture of both. Right. So the medicinal chemist is looking, right, okay, how quickly am I getting to sort of certain libraries, how they perform? The informatician is looking at, right, this is what the data is telling us. So, so the AI can help the informatician process that data. So, right, here are your top 50 candidates, from this, the way we want to screen this. So I think it's a balance of helping the group within drug discovery.
Right. That would seem much more realistic. This audience member was wondering what culturally needs to change in organizations for AI to succeed.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, that's got a story about complicated. Suddenly, I mean, AI is a very overused term at this point. There's a lot of hype around it. It appears on every AGM report, and it's something that is like, right, we need to digitize. It's like digitalization is as well. And it's going, right, we're going to use AI, right, on what? But it's something that shareholders like to hear, and probably investors like to hear as well. We're going to use AI. That's what we're going to do. And it's like, right, okay. The culture of that is think about how you're going to think about what you can use it on, and are you ready to use it on it? And so I think that's sort of where the culture needs to sort of just take a step or take a breath and think, right, how are we going to do it? Just because, again, like I said, just because you've got a hammer doesn't mean everything's a nail. So the expectation is that you're going to suddenly reduce wet lab stuff and 70%. We're probably not there yet. So, what's the sort of near-term goal for success? Because again, you're suddenly right, okay, well, we've applied an AI on it. We'll just wait and see the drug come out at the end. This cycle time is 18 years. So as much as pharma's great and invested in making big long-term bets, you're looking, the investment into it is like, well, in 2 years' time, why haven't we got a drug? It doesn't work like that. So I think that's also some of the sort of, right, what is a realistic sort of near-term, mid-term, long-term goal for our application of this, and is this the right tool for it? So I think it's that type of culture and the thinking around it is the thing that perhaps just needs a sort of step check, if you like.
Okay. Are you nervous about AI when you read stories such as AI partnerships parting ways?
No, I'm not actually. I think it's I think it helps us sort of just recognize. I mean, you can look at it and, well, it didn't work. But actually, that's perhaps not the situation here. I think it's a case of, right, well, did it optimize that part? And as we saw from some of the diagrams, and we sort of talked about that, there's lots of bits at the front end that still are not optimized, from a discovery phase. So there's lots of, and again, the maturity around the modeling is quite early. So there's lots of ways that part needs to change. Because again, if you're not modeling the right target, and your patient study modeling is not great either, you're optimizing the middle bit, and actually it doesn't come out. So again, I think it's a case of did it do what it was intended to do, which was maybe optimize the process, the timeline to get to sort of the candidates to be putting through into clinical trials. So no, I don't think I'm not worried about it, and I think it's sort of, sometimes I think that's where you can see, right, did these guys make the right call? They had the right goals, and actually it was there to do its job for this part of the process. And that's sort of what needs to happen. So.
And we are down to our final question. Final question for you, Hayden. Why do you think that we do not have an AI-driven drug commercially available?
Yeah, I think exactly to probably the answer to a couple of the other questions actually that we've had, which is really the process is long, and sort of the application around and the noise around it is really in the last sort of 5 years or so, 5 to 10 years, and again we're optimizing our bit. We're seeing a lot of time, and because the market mature, the use of the technology is maturer in the sort of this discovery phase. The patient phase is still early. The actual sort of target piece is early again. So I think there's still a lot of optimization available, either side, upstream and downstream from the discovery part of the process. There's still optimization in discovery. So, and again, it takes a long time. So if we started 10 years ago, in theory, if we look at our pipeline diagram at the very beginning, we may still have another 8 years to go. So who knows? But yeah, so I think that's the reality also as to where we are from managing our expectations. It's like it's the same thing when you used to get sort of somebody said, I've got a sat nav and I've got cruz control. So they sort of put the cruise control on, set the sat nav, and thought the car was going to drive itself. It doesn't. So we're I mean, that's how it's sort of like oversimplifying it, but I think that's it. It's like this is a long process. We're trying to shave bits off at different points. There will still be. We look at the patient part of it. There's still a 90% attrition rate there. So even if you improved that by 10%, you've still got an 80% attrition rate. So, the odds are still, not necessarily that favorable for you at the moment. So, but it will be a gradual process.
Okay. And that's all the questions that we have today. And I want to thank you, Dr. Hayden Bohm, for the excellent presentation. And based on a lot of the audience comments that we got, they thoroughly enjoyed it too. I want to thank you participants too for being a great audience. Be sure to check CNN or CNN Online for information on the next edition of CNN webinars. Thank you to On24 for the technology and production services. And thank you to Dotmatics for the sponsorship that made this interactive webcast possible. For CNN webinars, I'm Melissa O'Meara. Goodbye, everyone. Have a great day or evening, wherever you are.